Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. America has a longstanding policy when it comes to Taiwan and China, and it's called ballless strategic ambiguity. And it means exactly what it sounds like. I mean, it's meant to be completely vague and not at all clear. What is clear, though, is that China sees Taiwan as part of its sovereign territory, and they don't like it when anyone, particularly America, regards Taiwan as being independent. America's strategic ambiguity policy is this. In the event of conflict between Taiwan and China, America purposely makes its stance less than clear. Maybe, would we come to the aid of Taiwan? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, that's literally our stance. It's lukewarm support for Taiwan's independence. So why would America take that approach? To keep the peace, because that's working so well. And for 4 decades, that seems to maybe kind of have worked, although apparently not anymore. We don't really talk a lot about Taiwan's independence, and we don't talk about whether or not we would defend them in case of an attack by China. So in exchange, China goes on making all of our stuff, and we can all pretend that there's not a giant elephant in our foreign relations room. Yay! But hey, free, like cheap Chinese labor, yay! But if you haven't noticed, China's on the move, and while a takeover of Taiwan seemed like a remote possibility, it's feeling more likely by the day, which is why what happened during the Summit for Democracy, I know, it's all the more interesting. It turns out that Taiwan's digital minister was presenting when his feed was cut. And that's because in the video presented by the digital minister, Audrey Tang, Taiwan was shown, you can see it right there, as free and open. It was a discussion about which Asian countries are open and which ones aren't. And Taiwan was a completely different color than that of China. So at one point, they cut away from Tang. And when they returned, well, they didn't have the video. And all they had was Audrey Tang and Audrey Tang's title. Now, Biden administration officials denied a report that they cut the video feed because of the Taiwanese officials' map. But in fact, they say it was a glitch that just happened to take place right then. So convenient. According to Reuters, sources say that Friday's slideshow by the Taiwanese digital minister caused frustration amongst U.S. officials after the map appeared in the video feed for about a minute. Now, the sources, who did not want to be identified due to their complete lack of courage, said that the video feed showing Tang was cut during a panel discussion and replaced only with audio at the specific request of the White House. Yeah. So, of course, this all sounds kind of ambiguous, kind of like America's policy of strategic ambiguity with regards to Taiwan's independence. Now, shortly after they cut this video feed, there was a disclaimer that also appeared at the bottom of the screen, which said, and I quote, "Any opinions expressed by individuals on this panel are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the U.S. government." Yeah, so cut through that. That was the White House, right? Scrambling to not offend China, who probably interrupted the president's nap with an angry phone call. In fact, one source told Reuters that the map generated an instant email flurry amongst U.S. officials in the White House National Security. Their counsel, NSC, angrily contacted the State Department, concerned that it appeared to show Taiwan as a distinct country. This is Facebook. That's what this is. Washington complained to Taiwan's government, which in turn was angry that Tang's video had been cut. I'm not apologizing for my French because it has to be called out for what it is. Let's be real. I am not strategically ambiguous, okay? Apparently, the particular slideshow that showed Taiwan is open, that slide, it had not appeared in the dry run versions of the presentation, and it's very important that everyone understand what color Taiwan's island's going to be in the little cartoon map. Because, you know, you do have the leader of the CCP who was offended by Winnie the Pooh and literally banned a cartoon, and also South Park and Mickey Mouse. Now, all of this comes during a period of intense pressure from Beijing and increasing tensions with America. Remember, we just announced a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics being held in Beijing, which means nothing. It means nothing. No American official is going to attend the games, but all the athletes will, and the companies and all the money. Yay! Now, there are military islands that China built into the straits, right? Because they wanted to say, wait, these islands just appeared in the water and they were always here and are ours, except they're not. And they're right in the middle of vital shipping lanes. So this is all in violation of international treaties, of course. There are constant violations of Taiwanese airspace happening with greater frequency, the month of November being one of the highest number of flypasts by China. And then, of course, there's the joint military exercises carried out by China and Russia. So, for instance, in October, Russia and China used a 10-warship flotilla to encircle Japan's main island. Seems friendly, right? China says it's to counter Japan's military buildup. Japan's too busy making anime and fighting over their royal family. Nobody cares, but China does. So obviously, China's letting Japan know who's the boss in the region. And then there's the summit between Russia and China that's set for tomorrow, in which pillow-faced Vladimir Putin is going to be discussing with Winnie the Pooh offended Xi Jinping about America's aggressive rhetoric regarding Ukraine. And it is true. I mean, really, Vlad has to be very careful how much he smiles, because the stitches might pop out and his face will slide back into this like gravitational center. Russia, like China, perceives our weakness and is applying pressure. Nobody really believes that the Biden administration is going to support Ukraine any more than they believed Hunter Biden was going to support the stripper's child that he had out of wedlock. Everybody knows this. Throw into all of this the pandemic, which likely started in it began in a Wuhan lab. Let's be real. It's crippled the West, killed 4 million people, and relations between Beijing and D.C. are tenuous at best. And now we have a CCP official accusing America of war crimes in Afghanistan. They want that lithium. He's saying the era in which the U.S. acted arbitrarily in the world under the pretext of democracy and human rights is over. I love being lectured about human rights from a country that likes to imprison people and make them work in sweatshops and forced labor, right? And also had a one-child policy, right? The fact of the matter is China smells blood. And they're pushing and prodding the Biden administration, they're just trying to get him to drink all of his Ensure in the morning, much less respond to this. They have their tentacles running through our universities, our media, and I'm talking about China. They have like academic Belt and Road initiatives in addition to their actual infrastructure Belt and Road initiatives. And our media and our sports leagues like the NBA, everybody wants that money, so they keep bending that knee. And our current administration is distracted, spending its time targeting fellow Americans as domestic terrorists, going after a guy who drank a Coors Light while walking through the Capitol, and waging a fictitious war against white supremacy, while China is doing everything that they're doing, and Russia's building up stuff outside Ukraine. They see that the administration is weak, and we're not in the mood to defend ourselves, much less anyone else. And they also see that there is not a single repercussion for anything that they do. A diplomatic boycott is about as much pushback from the United States. Well, it's completely meaningless. I have so many completely politically incorrect ways that I could make fun of this, but we are limited on time. This is all to say that China is growing restless. And into all of this is our strategic ambiguity policy, which is nothing but a statement of spinelessness, and it's growing more and more problematic. So, but China was behaving like a friendly nation, then ambiguity would be fine. But they're jerks. They want to fight, and they have their eye on Taiwan completely. And the fact that America doesn't tell China at least where we stand on Taiwan, it seems like it's doing more to escalate international conflict than de-escalate it. So coming up, we're going to talk to a foreign policy expert on this particular issue. Gordon Chang is one of the most informed people when it comes to the CCP and also these relations and everything going on with Taiwan and the Straits. He joins us next. Stay with us. Black Rifle Coffee is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves non-crappy coffee to people who love America. And they actually roast their own coffee. They don't just pretend to roast it and then slap a sticker on it while claiming that it's American roasted. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor, unlike Twitter trolls. And Evan even modified his gun trucks while he was in Iraq so he could grind coffee anywhere he went, because that's dedication. Like, seriously, that's a dork. Every morning overseas, Evan would cheers his coffee with his team leader before heading out on patrols for America. Great coffee grounds us no matter where we are, except Twitter. Through coffee, Evan was able to experience that perfect morning every morning, whether he was in Kabul, Seattle, which is Kabul, Portland, or wherever. It's all Kabul. So make someone's holiday better. Give them the gift of actual good coffee, Black Rifle Coffee. Just visit blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to get your freshest coffee in America. Holiday shopping's easy. Get all kinds of personalized stuff. And when you use code, let's get to the code, DanaTV, you can get 20% off coffee, apparel, and gear, plus 20% off your first month of the Coffee Club. Welcome back. In case you're just joining, we were discussing the Biden administration kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party as it relates to that strategic ambiguity, especially after this whole slide disaster at the Democracy Summit, which is very ironically named. Let's dive into this further into all of this with foreign policy expert and author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S. China Tech War, Gordon Chang. Gordon, as always, so appreciate you being with us. I've got to get your response to this headline that was made earlier this week, well, actually just yesterday, where we had the Audrey Tang from Taiwan giving the slideshow, which at the very ironically named, Democracy Summit, and then the feed cuts out, then it comes back, all because Taiwan was a different color on the cartoon map. It was a very different color from that of China, showing the openness of Taiwan and the lack of freedom in China. And of course, there was a flurry of emails, and then our strategic ambiguity was called into question. So first off, I guess the first part of my question is this something like this that important? One slide to China? Would CCP really, which I think this might be somewhat rhetorical. And then secondly, when are we going to end the ambiguity period with regards to recognizing Taiwan's sovereignty?
Dana, this is really important to China because Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, has really staked the legitimacy of his reign on taking Taiwan. He says that this is not something that can be passed down from generation to generation. He's put a time limit on this. And so when the United States does something, and it can be just a little thing like the color on the map at the Summit for Democracy, yes, it is important. When are we going to change our policies? I think we should have done it long ago. And also, even some people in the foreign policy establishment are saying that the Biden administration needs to go to strategic clarity. But we know that there are a lot of people in Washington right now who are timid, craven, and clearly the Biden administration is incompetent because they are sending out mixed messages. And they're not doing this intentionally. This is just disarray in the administration, and Beijing is noticing.
Yeah, Beijing is noticing for sure. And of course, all of this long-standing strategic ambiguity. What would it cause if the United States were to shift the policy and say we're going to start recognizing, which we have in little ways where we've had independently some lawmakers visit with Taiwanese leadership, but for the United States to shift more towards recognizing Taiwan's sovereignty, how much escalation does that get us? What does that do to our relationship with China, which is tenuous at best?
It puts our relationship with China on a much better footing because it says to Beijing, we're no longer afraid of you. And the other byproduct of this is that basically Beijing has to give up its any idea of invading Taiwan because they know that even if they think that they can take Taiwan, the casualties would be far too high for them. China's regime right now is extremely casualty adverse. We saw this with their attack on the Indians on June 15th of last year. So we know that the prospect of hundreds of thousands of Chinese dead would prevent the Communist Party from ever thinking of invading. So there are a lot of good things that happen when we are clear.
And it amazes me that we don't take that position. Why do you think that is with this administration? And I will say, there's even some Republicans that have been hesitant to do this.
Well, there's people who believe, they say, well, look, we can't anger China. We can't afford to do it for one reason or another. People say, well, we want to make money. There are a lot of different motivations for this. But unfortunately, what we have is a policy which is encouraging China to be provocative. This is not only a question of Xi Jinping waking up one morning and deciding to invade. This is also the possibility of a mistake. This is a possibility of an accident caused by extremely belligerent Chinese actions. They may not intend to go to war, but they can do something that ends up that way. So right now, the administration is not able, I think, to deter China.
Now, one of the things that we learned, Gordon, is that Xi Jinping talking with Vladimir Putin, lamenting America's aggression. And I love how two of the biggest tyrants in the world are talking about America as the aggressor. What sort of relationship do Russia and China have? Are they, and now this is not a geopolitical term, are they frenemies? How would you describe that in layman's terms? Because it seems as though they would be natural allies if they have a shared enemy in the United States.
They're very close. They coordinate their foreign policies. They also coordinate their military actions. You have a lot of smart people in the United States saying that China and Russia will never form an enduring partnership, that they either hate or abhor each other. And, that could very well be true, but it doesn't matter. Because in the here and now, we have Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping working closely together because, as you say, they identify the same enemy. And also they realize that their interests coincide the way they define them. So I don't care about the long term. I care about now. And right now, they're working very closely together against us and our friends and our partners.
Yeah, very much so. And it almost makes you wonder if they're not coordinating in terms of Russia with Ukraine and, of course, China with Taiwan, because that would be a great way to divide America's energies and really, NATO's energies as well. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, it seems almost purposeful. I kind of take the Occam's razor approach with this kind of stuff.
We could very well be on the doorstep of history's next great conflict, because once China moves against Taiwan or India or Japan or the Philippines, it doesn't really matter. Russia will move on Ukraine or vice versa. And we don't even have to have these two great powers acting in direct coordination. They could just take advantage of the situation. And by the way, Dana, it's not just Moscow and Beijing. It's also North Korea, Pakistan, Iran, Algeria. They could also take advantage of the situation, or they could actually act in direct coordination. But really, we could see conflicts at both ends of the Eurasian landmass, also North Africa. And that really would be what people would call World War III.
Oh, yeah. And we could, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here. That's a scary thing to think about, talking with Gordon Chang. Gordon, one of the things that a lot of the discussion that we saw last week, particularly after Biden held an initial video teleconference with Vladimir Putin. We didn't really get out a lot from the White House, but from what we did understand is that apparently they're even proposing, giving some of Ukraine's sovereign territory over to Russia to sort of pacify them. And some were saying, well, we're not going to get involved with Ukraine because Ukraine's not a NATO member. But people say that Taiwan is different. When looking at either Ukraine or Taiwan as objects of either of these tyrants' desire, tell us a little bit about what effect that would have, not just on the United States and our national security interests, but internationally, if China was able to achieve its objectives with regards to Taiwan.
Taiwan is now the test of U.S. credibility around the world after the fall of Afghanistan. So we would not only lose our alliance structures in East Asia, we probably also would lose them in Europe as well. And we'd be on our own. Because right now, after one debacle, you can't afford a second one. The United States, since about the 1880s, maybe around the 1870s, has drawn its western defense perimeter off the coast of East Asia. And that means Taiwan is at the center of our critical defense line. And that very much means that we have to make sure that we keep the peace, because if Taiwan would fall, then Japan probably would be put at risk. Because remember, Japan and Taiwan form the same island chain. So we're not talking about Taiwan. We're talking about the entire region and our friends and partners throughout the world.
Goodness. Changing gears a little bit to look at 2022, it's astounding to me, Gordon, as I'm sure it is you, because I've seen you tweet about this, the Olympics in Beijing. A diplomatic boycott is just nothing to me. I'm just amazed that we're actually going through this. What are the chances that this could escalate beyond a diplomatic boycott, especially after we've seen a tennis player disappear? Honestly, as an athlete, I would be nervous about going over there knowing the political tensions right now. What are your thoughts on this?
Beijing is actually worried that the International Olympic Committee will be forced to move the Winter Olympics from Beijing. And we know that because Beijing arranged that teleconference between Thomas Bach, the head of the IOC, and Peng Shuai, the tennis player that you mentioned, who was disappeared. If it were up to Peng and she wanted to talk to someone, she would talk to Steve Simon, the head of the Women's Tennis Association, because he's been leading the charge on her behalf. She would not talk to Bach, who has been extraordinarily silent about her plight. So we know that Beijing is concerned, and that means that the Biden administration should be pressing the IOC on this, because it's not just a question of the safety of athletes, which of course should be paramount, but it's also because China is committing genocide, crimes against humanity, and these atrocities are far worse than what the Third Reich was committing in 1936 when they hosted the Summer Olympics.
That's a very good point because there's been a lot of distinctions drawn between the two, and that's a very good point to remind people of. And of course, you have now Chinese companies, CCP, they're paying influencers here in the United States to get people, I guess, excited and look forward to the Olympics. I mean, it's the great information warfare. I can't stand social media for the influencer aspect of it. I'm sure that you've seen those headlines, Gordon. There's a lot of people apparently that are getting that the CCP is hired to promote the 2022 Olympics on Instagram and elsewhere.
Yes, China's information warfare campaign far dwarfs that of any other country, including Russia. And last year, part of this campaign actually advocated the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. They had people both surreptitiously and openly talking about that. That's an act of war, Dana, and our government was completely silent about it.
Yeah, that very not haven't said any. I can't stand whether it's the strategic ambiguity or the refusal to even acknowledge, like what you were saying, which is consider. I mean, that's like could be considered an act of war completely. Switching gears, looking at the economic situation of China. You and I have talked before about the CCP's dependence on exports and how so long as other nations desperately rely upon the products or antibiotics or rare earth elements of China, I don't know if that buys us a little bit of time or is an insurance policy somewhat. I wanted to get your thoughts on that and then what the collapse of Evergrande means, not just for China, but also international markets as well.
Yeah, Evergrande is completely critical to the Chinese economy because the property sector is 25 to 30% of gross domestic product. But more important, Dana, 70 to 80% of the wealth of the Chinese people are in property. And that means that any problems in the property sector, including the failure of Evergrande and the failure of other property developers, really puts all of China at risk. And that makes China really dangerous right now because Chinese leaders can see a closing window of opportunity. They have no way to get beyond the property crisis because this is a debt crisis. Debt in China could very well be between 3 to 400% of gross domestic product, which is something that they could not handle. So we've got to be concerned that they're going to move now because they realize that if they don't, they're not going to be able to intimidate us or actually exert national power against America.
Yeah, they're right there on that knife's edge. That's just a lot of terrifying concepts to think about. Gordon Chang, we so appreciate your expertise on these issues, and thank you so much for letting us pick your brain about this over the past year. Thank you so much, and Happy New Year to you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Dana, and thank you so much.
Of course. So last week, we told you about a biological male competing as a female swimmer for the University of Pennsylvania. Well, that story has since taken off, and some of the teammates are speaking out. You don't want to miss this coming up next. You have homeowners insurance for a good reason, because without it, fire, flood, or burglary could destroy you financially, but there's another major crime that your homeowner's policy doesn't cover, and that is home title fraud. Law enforcement calls title fraud one of the fastest growing crimes, and it can ruin you financially, which is why you need Home Title Lock. Title fraud happens when a criminal can forge your signature on a document stating that you sold your home, and then they can take out loans against your home and leave you with the payments. You'll spend a lot of money trying to prove that you didn't commit fraud. Home Title Lock puts a virtual barrier around your home's title, and the instant they detect anyone trying to forge their way onto it, they help shut it down. Visit HometitleLock.com, register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim, and enter code radio for 30 free days of protection. So last week we talked about Leah Thomas, a biological man who is identified as a woman and swimming now for the women's team at the University of Pennsylvania. And Leah Thomas only swam for the women's team after first swimming and competing for the men's team. As I said, it's one thing for a person to suffer from the mental illness of gender dysphoria, but it's another thing for an entire society to accommodate it at the expense of disenfranchising women. But since we're now increasingly, I guess, a illogical society, institutions like NCAA allow men to compete as women, which means people like Leah Thomas, men, get to dominate women who have worked their entire life to compete at the highest levels. It's insane, it's unfair, it's illogical. And apparently some teammates of Leah Thompson agree, and they have spoken out in light of Thompson shattering women's school records. Surprise, surprise. He set a school record in the 1650 meter freestyle. Second place swimmer was his teammate who finished 38 seconds behind him. Now, an anonymous teammate of Thomas has just spoken out, claiming that most members of the team have expressed their displeasure over the situation to their coach, Mike Schnorr. She said, quote, "Pretty much everyone individually has spoken to our coaches, not about liking this. Our coach, Mike Schnorr, just really likes winning. He's like most coaches. I think secretly everyone just knows it's wrong. It's the wrong thing to do. When the whole team is together, we have to be like, oh my gosh, go Leah, that's great. You're amazing. It's very fake," end quote. Of course it is. Just like Leah Thomas is not a real woman. It's fake. It's true. And I'm not going to be patriarchally, I'm not going to have the patriarchy come down and oppress me for that. Like I said, NCAA, which is governed by mentally ill progressives, permits men to compete as women so long as they take testosterone suppression treatment, which does nothing for bone density, muscle mass, et cetera, et cetera. We've talked about this. Now, the teammate went on to say that it's plausible Thomas could not only win national championships in women's swimming, but break national women's college records that were set by eventual Olympic gold medalists like Missy Franklin and Katie Ledecky. Swimming, as the biological male that he is, Leah Thomas times were better, if not fractions of a second off the NCAA women's records. Now, he's been a bit slower swimming as a woman, but clearly the records are well within reach. Anybody with a brain can see where this is heading. The complete erasure of women's sports. Every parent out there needs to take a long look at their daughter. This is the world that we're handing them. A world where men can dominate women and nobody can be as good of a woman as a man, just as long as they say that they're women too. And like I said, if we permit this, we should be the ones to have our heads examined. Coming up, we'll find out what's being done to combat all of this craziness and protect women's sports with Beth Stelzer. She is the founder of Save Women's Sports. She joins us on the other side. Thanks to Biden's economic policies, job numbers are abysmal and inflation skyrocketing. Instead of following the former president's pro-business agenda that had the economy booming, Biden wants to tax corporations and pass trillion-dollar bills we can't pay for. Be proactive. Take steps to protect your wealth in retirement by investing in gold and precious metals, and legacy precious metals can help. Washington prints money to pay for their outrageous bills, but that just devalues your dollar. Gold offers a hedge against inflation. As the dollar gets weaker, gold gets stronger. The folks at Legacy Precious Metals are the gold standard when it comes to investing in precious metals, and they have a team of experts who can counsel you on the best options for you and your family. Don't leave your retirement to chance. Call Legacy Precious Metals at 866-580-2088. Visit them online. Download their investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com. Welcome back. So as we just discussed, the attack on women's sports from transgender activists has been furious and has been fast. Thankfully, there are people standing up in defense of women's sports, people like Beth Stelzer. She is the founder of Save Women's Sports. She is a mom, amateur powerlifter, and athlete, and she joins us now. Beth, thank you so much for lending your voice to this and for standing up for women's sports. I was in sports in high school, college. I couldn't imagine my life without it. Thank you so much for protecting this domain.
Well, thank you for having me on and helping shine a light on this serious issue, because as you know, it's become such a toxic environment for anyone to speak out, let alone athletes or anyone with status. I'm very lucky that I'm in this spot that I can speak out. And if anything, I just want a plea today to tell people to speak up.
Yes, and we were talking a little bit earlier about the swimmer, Leah Thomas at University of Pennsylvania, and he's breaking records, women's records, and now his teammates are speaking out saying it's not fair. They feel really disenfranchised from positions that they would have normally on the team. And this is the thing, Beth. I mean, when women wanted to engage in sports, we created our own leagues. We created our, own everything. And we didn't force men to accommodate us. We said, you know what, we'll create our own soccer league. We'll do WNBA. We'll do track, field, all of it. And I just don't understand for the life of me why, if there is an insistence by transgender activists to do this, why they can't do the same as women have done.
It's simply about validation, in my opinion. And this is their ultimate validation, to take a trophy from women. And we're just going to be seeing this more and more and more as these men are stealing titles for women. Coaches are going to catch on that they can win. And let's face it, it's all about winning. And then in the end, it's all about money. So the NCAA, the Olympics, we're going to have to make them start listening to us.
Yeah. One of my friends is a high school track coach, and I was talking to her about this, and she was expressing just her displeasure about the way that I think intellectually the arguments discussed, because we keep hearing, oh well, we'll just have people on hormone suppressants, testosterone suppressants for a year, and then they can go compete, and then it's just the same thing. They're just the same as women, which I mean, that floors me. I mean, the bone density, the muscle mass. I mean, talk to me a little bit about this, because there's so much more to it.
Right? You cannot negate those differences between men and women. No matter women are not a hormone level. We can't magically change sexes. We are born, not worn. And I find it really offensive that men are basically putting on women's face and taking our opportunities and our titles away from us. It's basically like the story, The Emperor's New Clothes, only the emperor's not naked. He's wearing a dress or a swimming suit. And it's only a matter of time until everyone has the nerve to speak up. And that's what I'm hoping and doing with Save Women's Sports, is creating a platform to champion women's voices here.
And that's a really great way to put it as well, because it very much is. It reminds me of Dave Chappelle with his routine when he said, there are women who look at this, and it's the equivalent of, if you have a black person looking at someone, a white person in blackface, and you have a woman looking at a man, and he made the analogy, and I thought that's like a really good way to put it. It does, in many respects, feel like this.
It seems harsh, but it's very similar, and it feels really eerie to women for having to go through this. And people ask, where are the women? We've been harassed, we've been blacklisted, we've been canceled, we're getting our social media accounts taken away for simply stating the truth that a man can't become a woman, let alone how unfair it is for them to compete in female sports.
And one of the areas that you compete in, Beth, as I understand, powerlifting, there's a huge difference between men and women in powerlifting. And I know this was a hot topic of conversation with a New Zealand competitor. Talk to me about this, because this individual who competed for New Zealand had been a man, competed as a man, and I'm just like looking at his hip placement and his gait, and it's so much wider and thicker than that of a woman's. Talk to me about this.
This is a 40-year-old privileged white male competing against 20-something-year-olds and some of the indigenous women that he's stealing spots from. It's absolutely ridiculous to think that these differences can be changed. In sports like powerlifting and weightlifting, males can have advantages over 50%. In my sport of powerlifting, if you take the same age, weight, and training abilities of a man and a woman, and you compare them, the man is going to pretty much lift double what the woman can. This is just inexcusable. It is absurd that women like me and you need to even be talking about this.
Beth, if you were to walk into the arena, you're getting ready to compete, and just say that they just decided to, do a blood test, check your hormone levels, and if you had a hormone level comparable to that of a man competing as a woman, you would be disqualified, would you not?
Yeah, I mean, their levels are set at levels that are way higher than an average woman, 1 to 10 times higher than a woman's natural levels. This is just an atrocity against women. And altogether, this is an erasure of women. When we include gender identity with sex, we're erasing the definitions of sex. And when we can't define what a woman is, how do we protect her?
Oh, that's a great point. When you can't even define it, and that goes into the argument of protections for women as well, which is something that J.K. Rowling, she wrote the Harry Potter series, and people are angry with her because she was talking about protections in women when it concerned, sexual assault and rape and heinous crimes of that nature. I am worried as well. Oh, go ahead.
We're so grateful for women like her that have this platform and have the nerve to speak up, because she is pointing out the atrocities. It's not just sports. Women deserve rights, privacy, and safety across the board. We should know that if we end up in prison, it's only going to be with females. If we go to a rape crisis shelter, a doctor's going to be a female. This extends far and wide. There's so many branches to the tree, and it's time to chop it down.
There you go. Last question for you, Beth Stelzer, and we so appreciate Save Women's Sports, by the way. Everyone needs to go and check that out. What are you hearing about young women and girls going into athletics? I worry so much about what the future holds, because sports, they are such, I can't imagine my youth without them. I cannot even imagine. I was a really hyperactive kid.
They're the building blocks for womanhood. 95% of our CEOs and leaders have played in sports. So if we take away these opportunities, we are cutting off opportunities for leaders down the road. I have moms and athletes calling me scared to death to speak up because administrations have been telling them they can't speak up, or sponsors have been telling them they won't be sponsored. We literally have parents calling us, telling us their girls are refusing to show up anymore. It's absolutely ridiculous. Something has to give. Who's going to be the one to point it out?
Hopefully this can be stopped in its tracks, or at least, have a different league for people who, want to identify as women, etc. Have a different league for them, but we need to leave women's sports alone. Save women's sports.
Not up
Beth
for us
Stelzer.
to decide where they're supposed to be. Women's sports is definitely not the place. That's what we know. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Beth, of course. Thank you so much. So appreciate your voice. All right, folks, that does it for us tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in. And as always, good night and don't bend the knee.